podcast is powered by PKF. PKF, your trusted advisor in the Hunter for over 45 years. Down to Business acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and waters this podcast is recorded on.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Down to Business. Today I've got Nick Cutler joining me. Nick's got a great story all around what many of us love, many of us hate too, but around that thing called golf and chasing that little white ball around. But great story of how he's managed to, I guess, turn a passion into a business. And first of all, Nick, welcome.
Thanks, mate. Great to be here.
Nick's actually, is it managing director? Is it CEO? I guess it's the head honcho, if you like, or the owner of Australia Golf Digest, which many of you would see in either magazines or online. Top Tracer range, and also a new concept called Swing Factory, which I've seen a bit about and quite interested in, and we'll talk a bit through it. So welcome, Nick, and why don't you give us a bit of background? I said you've come through into this passion into a business, but how'd you get into, I guess, what many people would say is a desirable career, but getting to go and play golf courses for a living? I know you tell me there's more work than that.
Yeah, I think you've been speaking to my wife a bit, haven't you, about that? Look, long story short, it's funny, in prep today I was just sort of having a look back of kind of my career in media essentially, and I left school. I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I'd actually got into university to do, I think, sort of basically physical education and PE teaching, and it was lucky enough, got a contract to go play cricket in England for a year. Realised pretty quickly that was not going to be the career for me, and then came back, and at the time, a guy by the name of Peter Horwitz was sponsoring my cricket club in Sydney, Gordon Cricket Club, and he ran a company called Horwitz Publications back in the halcyon days of magazines, Inside Sport, which probably you're familiar with. The old familiar, I guess, formula of good-looking girl on the cover, and it was a sports magazine. And back in the day, that was it. And I was injured one day, which was almost the story of my career, essentially. And I just said to him one day, "Hey, how'd you get into do what you do?" And I want to do that. And long story short, used a few connections and got a job at Channel 10 as an assistant back in '95. And
not the talent.
No, definitely not the talent. Definitely not head for radio, as they say. And more on the commercial and sales side. Guy called Wayne Lightfoot there was the head of sport. So, got to know him pretty well. And really from that, my media career sort of took off. I spent a couple of years at Channel 10, jumped across, did a couple of years of radio, and then really sort of found my true passion at the time in about 97, 98, 99 kind of era was Pacific magazines or Pacific publications back in the day. And from that, really, I say to people I've been in media 20-odd years. It's now closer to 30 years, and never did go back to that uni degree. Have done numerous courses along the way, and it's probably the biggest lesson I've learned in the sense that everything's a bridge, nothing's finite. And so here I am. And then probably about 8 years ago now, ran into a friend who was working at News Limited at the time, and I used to work on Golf Digest many years ago, and she just casually dropped into a conversation. Used to work on golf. We can't quite make it work here. We're not sure whether it's big enough. And I sort of casually said, well, if you don't want it, I'll be more than happy to sort of buy it off you. And, within really 2 to 3 weeks, we had Golf Digest, and that was, what was that, eight years ago now. And really back then it was just a magazine. And that's all it was. We literally got a magazine. We've got a fantastic editor and now publisher who's still with us today, a guy by the name of Brad Clifton, who lives and breathes it, understands commercialities of it. And then we took that, and back then it was a magazine. Now we're reaching 1.2 to 1.5 million people across all forms of mediums: magazine, website, social media.
So I'll pick up on a couple of points there, and I want to talk about that probably I'll say the shit moment when you realise what have I just done. But good point you raised, and I think you've summarised it pretty well amongst a lot of years, but that power of connections, and a lot of the people that come on this, and we talk through how you've got to head in business, it's connections, it's relationships, it's networking. Has that been a natural flair, or do you think that comes off your team sport background?
I think, look, the team sport aspect definitely helps. I think, connections, they can mean different things to different people. But ultimately, probably the guy I sort of look up to most, my mentor at the time, unfortunately passed away about 5-6 years ago. A guy called John Motion said to me once, people will do business with people they like. and that's essentially the way that you sort of look at things. And ultimately, I'm a big believer in a win-win scenario. I think people shy away from, people know when they're sort of losing out on a deal, but I think if a win-win deal's there, but I think it also, look, I think there's time, occasionally you've got to burn your bridges and go, this is not gelling, we walk away from this, but ultimately, people will do business with people they like, and they'll find a way of doing business with people they like, and essentially, I guess that's what, I've sort of built my business on, which is going on, standing alone now, almost 14 years. So, something that I thought I'd be happy, and I said to my business partner at the time, look, let's go do this. It'd be really good fun for 3 or 4 years. 14 years later, here we are, still doing it.
Well, and I mean, and I'm just saying that we met actually in the right way in a Pilates studio. that Nick's wife actually runs, but that again comes off relationships, connections, and here we are today. So I couldn't agree more how powerful that is. But so Step, then you've gone from the comfort of regular paycheck, being employed, all the rest of it. Yeah, I'll buy that magazine, and you've called your bluff. And what was that when you actually gone? Well, I'm in business. It
was funny actually. We actually started. My creative director and I at the time started a business up 6 years earlier, and it's still the same business. It's CMMA, which stands for Custom Made Media Australia, and we were about just creating content back before content was really known. This is 14 years ago, and we would go in and produce content for clients that even as simple as we need to do a EDM or newsletter to someone, we would sit there and work on that for them. We produced full magazines, and we had clients like the Institute of Chartered Accountants at the time. We produced their magazine, Nick on Australia, Big W, etc. And I guess for us, I heard a great analogy of starting our own business up. It's like jumping off a cliff and trying to put a hang glider together on the way down. I was kind of forced into that position a bit. The company I was working for at the time, unfortunately, met their financial demise, and I just, to be honest, came to the conclusion that I really didn't want to work for Muppets anymore, and I thought I want to go do this by myself. And ultimately, whether you're playing a game of cricket or any sport or golf, you've got to back yourself. So I thought, what's the worst thing that can happen? I can go and have a crack at this, and 6 to 12 months' time, I'll go back in and find a job. I've got enough experience in media. So I had a guy by the name of John Motion, who I mentioned before. John had spent 25, 30 years under Kerry Packer, building the ACP magazine business. And when I started at Pacific Magazines, he was actually competing. He's building a magazine company that was competing against ACP at the time, ironically. And John had story after story of the Halcyon days. He was a Kiwi-born guy, got off the boat. His first job was the second year of World Series cricket, and Kerry pulled him in and said, these guys are ordinary expenses. Going and spending I think he said $30 bottles of champagne were everywhere. So John sort of came in there, worked a lot for Kerry at the time, and then started, Pacific Magazines up, with I think Ken Cutler at the time. I was just a young tacker, and he sort of took me under my wing. And then so when I started CMMA up, he was the first person I called, and I remember him distinctly having a coffee with him, and he goes, "What do you want me here for?" And I said, "I need grey hair." And he said, "Well, I've got plenty of that. Let's go do it." So we went and did it, and the business was very successful. Straight out of the bat. He unfortunately, again, it's probably a good lesson in life. He got diagnosed early, or about mid to late December, of pancreatic cancer at the time, and passed away 6 weeks later. So it's kind of been an interesting journey for me in that sense, where I always thought I'd be doing this with John the whole way through. And it didn't happen that way, but I think, again, you adapt. You get to the point where you go, look, I've got to do this. I've got people under my wing. I'm employing people. I've got a business partner. And, the people that we have in our business are very much, probably the number one word I use in interviews is autonomous. You need to be autonomous in small business. And, as an MD or a creative director or Brad as our publisher, you can't sit there and control everything. There's so many moving parts in the business. You need to be able to say, Andrew, I need you to go and do this. That's your scope. That's your role. And you need to have that person that's autonomous enough to do it. And that's really essentially where, and it's not, you make mistakes in business. People come in and you think they're going to be the right. And I find it probably the hardest thing I find is interviewing people. Because how do you really know someone at that point? But ultimately, then all of a sudden, Golf Digest landed on our lap sort of 8 years ago, and I did have that shit moment. I was at Otto's in Sydney, sort of celebrating the fact that we got Golf Digest, and I suddenly went, actually, this is a different business now. How are we going to do this? And it's one of those things that we make errors, but I've got a big saying in our business: if we're going to fail, let's just fail fast and then right those wrongs, or go in a different direction. And the business, it's, as I said, the revenue's almost triple what it was when we first took it over. The business model of media is constantly changing. Even in the last week, this little thing called Threads pops up on your phone, and you're like, "What's this?"
Yeah, I saw that. I don't know what it is, but I saw it.
You and I both. No, look. Essentially, it's the Mark Zuckerberg or Facebook version of Twitter. I'm not a big Twitter guy, so I'm going through a big learning curve. How that relates to my business right now, I'm not sure. But when 30 million people download it in 24 hours, and I think they're talking close to 100 million in 7 days, it's got a role to play. We're just not sure what it is yet. And that's the beauty of our business. We wake up every morning and there's something new, and all of a sudden Facebook was cool 10 years ago because mum and dad are on it now. Facebook's not cool, and it's TikTok and it's something else and things like that. Yeah. So it's not boring. So
and I guess that's the other aspect too, that you've got, especially with something like, let's go back to golf. You're talking from even pre-teens playing golf to people well into their old age.
Absolutely.
How many different generations and how many different communication methodologies are there, etc. That you need to try and reach various markets.
Absolutely, and people engage with you. You just got to talk to them in the right medium and in the right way. Golf's a great example where my little boy Mac loves the game. The age of 7, right through to friends of mine's grandparents. Actually, Steve, our deputy editor, is interviewing someone in Hobart or Tasmania in the next week. She's 100 and plays around every week. And what does a game golf to mean to everyone? I think there's been a lot of change in golf, particularly in the last sort of 12 to 18 months to 2 years, with things like Live coming along. But people are time poor, and the game, I for one always think about myself. Only 1 in 10 people in Australia at the moment that picked up a club in the last year have a handicap. So you sort of look at that and go, well, hang on, there's 9 out of 10 people that don't have a handicap. How do they play golf? And Golf Australia very smartly, and James Sutherland, when he came into Golf Australia, the governing body, said, look, all golf is golf. So if I take my kids to go and play mini golf on the weekend, they're classified as a golfer. If I'm what I call a range goat, and there's 300,000 people like that around the country that never step foot on a golf course, and they go into, all they do is go to their local driving range and hit golf balls, they're classified as a golfer. There's things like Holy Moly, which is, the really fun mini golfs that started. And, technology in driving ranges is absolutely coming into it. And then all of a sudden you go, well, what does golf mean? And I love the tradition of the Masters, the Open and things like that. But I also love the fact that there's, amazing facilities in Australia that, I've heard great stories of people turning up in work boots and they're saying, well, you can't wear any work boots because it's going to ruin the greens, but just go play barefoot. And they've got high vis on, and ultimately you're always going to have top tier clubs. But I think as a sport, we're getting better at. We've got to do a better job of embracing absolutely everybody.
Well, it's realistic. You're talking business in life generally. It's about diversity and inclusion.
That's exactly right.
You've still got these traditions that you still try to buck the trend a bit.
And I sort of sit on the fence. Like I understand that there's a club and they've got certain rules and regulations. You need to wear a collared shirt, but getting down to simple things like if you've got a pair of black pants and you've got a pair of black shoes, but you've got black socks on, or you're wearing shorts and you've got black socks on, they're going, sorry, we have to wear white socks. That kind of, I think, is that overreaching aspect. But also, I love the fact that there's clubs out there taking away sort of women's tees and ladies' tees, and they're just basically saying there's 3 or 4 colours and it's abilities tees. You just play where you want. And I think as a sport, we've got to be embracing that because, funnily enough, before COVID hit, 67% of golf clubs in Australia are under financial distress. So that's close to 7 out of 10. And what was happening was the game was dying, and they were literally dying. We just weren't replenishing them. And I think now COVID's come along, we've had a massive boom, 40% growth in the sport. What's it going to look like in 5 or 10 years' time? It's up to us as an industry to embrace that and say, look, and just the other day I was speaking to Callaway, and the fastest growing market for the game right now is the women the 45 plus market, and their biggest selling grossing product in the last 12 months in Australia was a product called Riva, and that's their female skew clubs. And you're going, well, that's got to be telling you something about where the game's going. But if you're a club that then turns around and says, the archaic version of associates can only play on certain days, then I think very, very quickly the game's going to sort of weed you out, and you're going to sort of not find yourself. You'll probably find yourself in the same position as a lot of the clubs were pre-COVID.
So I guess that then from an industry trend, but also in what you've had to do in business, is your ability to adapt and pivot.
100%. Yeah. And I think for us, we made a decision about 12 months ago, probably 18 months ago, as Golf Digest or Australian Golf Digest to. We could see what's happening in the women's sport, in the women's game in golf, and sort of look at it and go, well, we've got to do better at that. And every day, every week, we've got to do better at actually servicing that market. And this year we're going to be doing a standalone women's issue of Australian Golf Digest. We're doing 12 issues plus the women's issue, and we believe that'll hopefully become at least a quarterly magazine and publication for us. We've got dedicated areas on our website, and content on a daily basis is coming through in and around. But again, you have to adapt. You have to service who's coming to your site. Yeah,
it doesn't matter what business you're in. I think too many don't, and I think the classic one that always gets raised at business seminars and that sort of thing. You think of Kodak. Why didn't they have the the digital camera and so on and so on? They're one of the biggest companies in the world at that point in time.
Yeah, well, they're great. I think the great cliche, and it's true that Netflix, Blockbuster had the ability to buy Netflix, and you kind of look where it is now. Yeah. You're never going to get everything right. And I think that if you go in with a mindset of saying business is going to be perfect, this is going to be really smooth sailing, and it's never going to be like that. But as I said early on, you're going to fail fast, and learn from those mistakes, and go, look, sometimes there won't be a solution. You just have to stop, turn around, and go back the other way. Other times, you hit something, and you go, actually, this isn't quite right. But if we adjust this and do this, then that's where we want to do it.
Yeah, sure. Learn from the mistakes.
Exactly.
So I guess we've spoken a lot about Australian Golf Digest, but you talk a bit about, so you got Top Tracer range, which again, by range I mean golf range, I guess, and you'll explore that. But that's another example of that adapting.
Yeah, look, you're always on the lookout for the next big thing. Particularly in what we do, we like to be sort of ahead of the game. And I was walking through the PGA Golf Show 4 years ago now, and ran into an Aussie guy. Started having a chat with him. And a guy by the name of Troy Warfield, and he was working for Top Golf at the time. And Top Golf, there's a Top Golf on the Gold Coast, amazing facilities, in the sense of, probably the ultimate driving range experience. I think there's 82 of them in America now. There's still only one in Australia, but I believe there might be another one coming at some point. And essentially, I started talking to him, and he said, hey, look, I want to show you something, and, signed probably the world's thickest NDA and he said, look, trust me, sign it. And, being an Aussie, you kind of trust him in the middle of Orlando, Florida. You're like, okay, I'll trust you. Let's do this. And he showed me sort of Top Tracer range, and it's an absolute game changer. And then I met a gentleman by the name of Ben Sharp, who's the global head of Top Tracer, the global president. And he said to me at the time, Top Tracer will grow the game of golf more than anything else I've seen. And Ben's had 20 plus years in major sort of like places like TaylorMade, and so he's been a major industry player. And effectively, what Top Tracer is what you see on TV. Excuse me. With the majors now, the Pro tees off and you see the ball being traced. That's effectively Top Tracer range. It's the technology is 2 cameras. You hit a ball, every bay in between, which is generally 10 bays. Every bay has a 21-inch touchscreen TV. It gives you all your data immediately, but what it more importantly does is it gamifies it. So I can actually go to a driving range now with Top Tracer range. I can play around at Pebble Beach. I can play around at St Andrews in 50 minutes. I can play nearest to pin games. I can play, if I'm a golfer, it's got 3 or 4 gaming modes there that are absolutely brilliant for my game. There's one called My Practice where I can actually choose the club I want to do. And when you download an app and you scan in, and you go to a range once a week for that whole year, every bit of data, every ball that you hit is stored on your app. So I can go back after 12 months and go, how far am I really hitting my 7-iron? Or how far am I really hitting my driver? And ultimately then, that's great for the golfer, but the gamification side of it, and McAllister, my little boy, is probably a great example. When I went to the range without Top Tracer, he'd probably come 1 every 2 times. Yeah, I'll come, got nothing to do. When I take him to a range with Top Tracer, he's the one asking me to go to the range. Or I say now, hey, you want to go to the range on Saturday? His first question is it the one with TVs? And then he comes, he sits down, well, Monkey goes through a bucket of balls way quicker than I do, so he's generally stealing my balls at the end of it. But he'll play a game called Go Fish for 45 minutes, and all I hear him is, Dad, and you hit the ball, and you get, every shot wins a prize, and he'll go, Dad, I got Nemo, or Dad, I got a rusty boot. Then he'll go, Dad, I just want to see how far I want to hit, and then you put him on the long drive mode. But ultimately, when he's asking me as a 7-year-old, can we go to the driving range? That to me tells me kind of what's going on. And we got the sort of sales rights in Australia. We're in 21 ranges in Australia and New Zealand at the moment. We'll be in 30 in the next sort of 6 months. Ultimately, as a driving range, if you don't have technology in the next 2 or 3 years, you'll simply get left behind. And what it does, it supercharges the business. So instead of, Charlestown Driving Range in Newcastle is a probably good example. Joe Mantle up there, the GM, was, and Barry at the president, are very progressive. They were building this new driving range, and they said, look, here's our numbers. And I said, look, I think you're a little light. Number one thing I'll be doing is buying more balls. And they bought another 10,000 balls, and basically they're doing double the amount of balls they did, or that they thought they'd be doing, purely off the back of Top Tracer. And Joe always says to me, I've never seen more teenagers. I've never seen more women at my driving range, and it's just people having fun. And you don't have to be a golfer. You just turn up and hit balls.
Yeah, no, you're right. I've been there several times, and there's people lined up waiting for bays. So, So I guess that message is the importance of technology for businesses generally.
And
in an innovative way or an efficient way within their business.
And I think it's kind of, I look at this of, go back to your Kodak moment. For golf, I think this is going from your film to digital. In some ways, the old, hitting balls out there. And then I realised kind of where the game or the driving range space was going. And probably a really good example in our sport at the moment is Top Golf, we're over here, and Callaway, we're over here. And I think October, November 22, they merged to become one company. If you sort of look from the outside in a very 10,000 feet view, if you look at Callaway, great brand in golf, they're doing fantastic things in golf in the pure core golfer sense. But where the growth is, if you look at something like Top Golf, go back to 2013 in America, there were, I think, 14 million off-course golfers, so people that just hit balls in driving ranges, and 25 million golfers. You forward ahead to 2023, right, and there's 25 million off-courses and 25 million on-courses. So basically the growth has been the off-course. And that's, Callaway saw that, and, they've formed it. And that's where, building a golf course is a very expensive exercise. A lot of land's required. And ultimately it's seen as that white middle-aged sport. Things like Top Tracer advancing this sport into being a sport for everyone.
Well, and the other thing, and I know you and I have discussed this before, but life's busy.
100%.
People are time poor. I know back in the good old days, carefully watches this, in the good old days when I used to play golf twice a week, now you'd be lucky to play twice a month or beyond. So that aspect of being able to provide and accommodate not only other parts of the market but also the time poor, it's very important.
I mean, I have a great saying to people. People go, "Oh, you must play golf all the time." I go, "Look, I work in golf. I don't play golf." That's my wife will say something different. Whenever I'm on a golf course, I always take photos, and that's what she thinks we do all day. But ultimately, I'm a great example where a 7-year-old boy, a 10-year-old girl, their sport is on the weekend. That comes first. For me, disappearing to go play a round of golf for 5 hours is just not an option. But going away and being able to hit golf balls for an hour, and especially if a little boy comes, and it's great sort of father sort of dad moment, but ultimately go away for an hour and hit golf balls, and I get my itch scratched. That's perfect, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think as an industry, that's what people are embracing more and more. And then the other thing too is going back to the women's game. I think probably one of the most daunting things for either men or women is you've never played golf before. That very first round you play, that very first tee shot on the very first hole in front of the clubhouse is probably as intimidating as it gets. It's really, really tough. But the range and Top Tracer take that away. So you can go and hit a bucket of balls. They can go everywhere, but you're having fun. You're playing with your friends or you're playing there. There's no judgment aspect about it. So it's a great lead into the game.
Well, and I think that's the message. It's really understanding what drives your market and how they feel, and if they whether it be your boy or whether it be an older lady or whatever it may be, if they walk away knowing that they've got enjoyment, they've got a benefit, they'll be a repeat customer.
That's exactly right. And the other thing about Top Tracer is, people come back. It's proven people come back more often. I mean, we've retrofit driving ranges that haven't had technology, they've been there for 30 years, putting in Top Tracer, and that's literally all they've done. And they can charge 20 to 30% more because it's seen as cheap entertainment. And the growth rate's 20, 30, 40, 50%. We've had a range down in Mildura in the middle of country Victoria. They doubled the number of people through their range just by putting in Top Tracer. And again, it just becomes that sort of it's not a sport just for the golfer. It just becomes that family. It's basically entertainment.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. You're growing your market. So and the final one that we mentioned was Swing Factory.
Yeah.
Now and I mean we've had a bit to do, but why don't you explain about Swing Factory?
So I think early on in the piece I was going out there and speaking on the coalface to a lot of people on the driving range. They've been in driving ranges for years, and predominantly they're PGA golf pros. And their business essentially was to sell buckets, lessons, and a bit of retail. And their food and beverage offering, which nothing wrong with it, was Coke Fridge and crisps and things like that. What Top Golf has done in the US is, or globally really, is kind of create entertainment around the game. And a good friend of mine, a guy by the name of Eric Weber, him and I started talking, and I kept ringing him up saying, look, there's something here, I don't know what it is. And another friend of mine did a roll-up of dental practices, and I was sort of talking to him about stuff. And Eric and I just started talking. I said, look, the future of the driving range business, let's just go ahead 10 years. What does it look like? And we sort of came up with a bit of a model. And Eric had run Moore Park in Sydney, which is arguably Australia's busiest driving range. They didn't have any technology at the time, and he'd left there and was sort of going back and forth. And we sort of started working on a concept around what does this driving range look like. And we got a great guy by the name of Nick Ambin in, who's a golf business. He's a business analyst, but he's really worked in golf for probably the last 10, 15 years. And we started working this out. And essentially we sort of looked at it and went, well, there's underserved markets in Australia that don't have a driving range, and you can't hit golf balls. But what happens if we get a couple of these driving ranges and turn them into, if you've got a Top Golf facility, which in Australia now is probably a $70 to $100 million build, one that's maybe $10 to $15 million build, or something in, not far in between, but also even where you buy a driving range and you retrofit it and you renovate it. So we managed to find some fantastic partners that sort of came on board and embraced the vision. And we acquired Golf Paradise Terry Hills, which have been up in northern part of Sydney, 58 bay facility, sort of older mini golf at the time. And basically our vision is to renovate the entire facility, which we've just got DA approval to do. We'll put in a brand new mini golf, and it's not the mini golf that some people think of where you're hitting the ball through clowns, in windmills and things like that. It's properly architecturally designed mini golf, and it's it's a great skill to play, but it's a great skill to design in the sense of it's got to be easy enough for a 5-year-old to play it, but challenging enough for a single-figure handicapper to play it. And that's, there's absolutely a skill set to do that. And, it's a $1 to $1.5 million sort of, upgrade on the mini golf, Top Tracer range and everything. And then a really good, the key that binds it all together is good food and beverage. So what we call swing-friendly food. So we've acquired Golf Paradise in Sydney, hoping to hit balls in sort of early summer this year in regards to, renovating that. And that will be opening as a swing factory. And then secondly, we've gone into a joint venture partnership with the Whitehorse Council down in Melbourne, building a brand new facility around the Moorac Golf Course, the public golf course facility there, where again it's a public golf course. We'll be improving that, building a brand new driving range with 28 bays, good food and beverage with a really good mini golf, and it kind of becomes that community hub. And look, our vision is to roll out a bunch of these around the country, and there's some, hopefully some good news coming in a not too distant future. And one brand essentially that people go, hey, a swing factory's coming to my community. It's fantastic. And
so it's not really, you change from I'm in the business of golf to I'm in the business of entertainment.
It's an entertainment business wrapped around golf, absolutely. And we love the idea of mum and dad coming along, and you basically, kids can go play mini golf. Mum and dad can sit there and have a coffee, and the kids can go and play it, and there's no adults required.
And I think that's a great point when you consider in any business who's the real decision maker and who are you pitching at. Another guy that's been on this, and Mick Carr, and that you and I both know, they run the Grub Lab around food and beverage offerings in pubs and that sort of stuff. And the stats show that above 90% of family eating decisions made by kids.
100%.
You think about and nearly what we're talking about here is nearly the same thing. I think for most business owners, it's who are you pitching at and who's the real decision maker.
Yeah, and I think, look, Swing Factory's got a fair way to play out, but I think the important thing so the biggest thing I've sort of learned about putting something together like Swing Factory together was finding the right partners around it. So we've found some great investors that have sort of been in this kind of space before, early adopters that believed in the vision, and then finding those people around it. And that's probably the biggest thing as well. Obviously there's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts at my end, doing the Top Tracer and the Australian Golf Digest, and you find the right people in the right positions, and you just, again, autonomy, they just go off and do what they do, and you trust their judgment. And it all bodes well at the moment, and it's pretty exciting.
And I guess that links into, you mentioned partnerships, but also when you say you employ people, you've raised autonomy a few times now. That only works if you allow them to be autonomous. Which I think for a lot of business owners, there's that whole, I'm looking over your shoulder and micromanagement. So how have you, I guess, brought yourself to be able to do that?
I guess for me, it's been a real trial and error kind of scenario. You kind of, I look back on times and go, I gave that person way too much leeway, probably 3, 4, 6 months worth of leeway where I should have sort of pulled it in. And you got to go on your gut feel occasionally, and you get better at, sort of, I guess, captaining your side in regards to what you do. And ultimately, I find you find the right person, and you instill trust in them, and they feel like that you're trusting them, they're going to deliver. And in the last probably 6 months in my business, I sort of in the media business, I said to the guys, look, we're 24/7. I wake up in the morning and news breaks. I mean, a good example was when the Live and the PGA merger was announced. Brad Clifton, my publisher / editor, checked his phone at 11:59 and basically got a tip off to say, hey, sit by your phone, something's coming through in the next minute or two, and the merger came through. And Brad was up at 12:01. I had my phone beside my bed. I heard it ring a couple of times, didn't pick it up. Got up to go to the bathroom at 2:45, mistakenly checked my phone and thought Brad's message was, hey, I think it's April Fool's. And then when I was checking, it was like, this is legit. And that was it, I was up. But Brad does that quite often. He does that all the time. My staff do that all the time on Saturdays, Sundays. They get up and they do stuff. It needs to be done. Media 24/7, they do it. So, 6 months ago, I said to guys, I'm reading all this stuff about a 4-day week. Let's start having a think about how we do this. So we've gone to a 4.5-day week at the moment. Everyone knocks off at essentially 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock on a Friday. Does it happen? No, because I can see the guys still doing stuff. But ultimately as well, over the next 3 to 6 months, I want to go to a 4-day week. But ultimately, all the research I see suggests that, hey, people are they overachieve still on 4 days. And I think that comes down to what you're saying about autonomy. If you give someone, hey, I'm trusting you to do this, I know you're going to deliver, you get weirded out very quickly if you don't. So it's kind of one of those things. Again, if someone needs micromanaging, they're probably not right for my business, I'll be honest. They might be very good at what they do, but we just don't have the time to do that. So it's very much a trial and error, and there's no one formula to go, you've got to do this. But my big thing is gut feel on the person. And in some ways, we are kind of lucky in what we do in the media side. If I've got a designer and we have deadlines to hit, they've got to hit their deadlines. If I've got sales guy, advertising sales, etc., and marketing, they've got budgets to hit. Brad and his editorial team have deadlines to hit for writing. So it kind of all comes together, and everything stops if people don't hit their deadlines.
Sure. So I guess it's that self accountability. But as you said, you've got to have the right people in the right seats.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
That's great. And I guess so. You speak a lot about people and how leading in that from how they're such an important part of your business and that autonomy. So how have you gone about engaging the right people? And I note you said you made some mistakes, retaining them, and then the appropriate delegation.
Yeah, look, there's probably not one thing I can put my finger on, but I think, in something like the golf industry, it's a reasonably small industry. From the outside looking in, people think quite large, but in Australia, it's actually quite a cottage industry still. And you kind of hear murmurs about people who are good, things like that. And I think ultimately as well, you always keep your ear to the ground, you always make notes about, such and such might be good here, or hey, we're looking to potentially expand. Brad and I speak a bit about sort of, what's happening in the wider industry, about, you're sort of making waves here or there, or you speak to clients, and clients are always up front. They'll tell you when things are good, or tell you when things are bad. And we, I like to say to clients all the time, how can we do better? What can we do better? What are you looking for as a business? And really, it's just, sometimes it's timing as well. Sometimes you look at people and you go, I'd love to grab you now, but it's just not the right time. And you might miss out on that person. But unfortunately, that's part and parcel of business. And a lot of times things don't line up. But I think ultimately you've got to go with your gut feel, and you just got to sit there and go, well, if I completely stepped away from this business, what's the business look like? And how's it going to run day to day? And if you find the right people in the right key positions, I think you're ahead of the game. And we're lucky. We're not a big business. We can move very, very quickly. Whereas if you've got a big multinational, it can take years to turn that kind of thing around. And culture in a small business, culture's hard. Culture is very hard, and we were kind of spread out around the country anyway. Before COVID, COVID came along and I think my deputy editor Steve, who lives in Launceston, and I think it was 2 years between seeing each other. And but you speak to each other all the time on Teams, but physically seeing someone. But we kind of work as a team, and we've got people across the country, all states, essentially.
Yeah, no, it's good. Good point. So, we spoke a lot about the some of these other businesses that effectively are spin-offs to where you started. I mean, in a loose term, but have they all come just off? I mean, you said you've walked through PGA show and that sort of stuff, but to actually make them businesses, is it really the connections?
Yeah, look, I think Top Tracer was, I think the harder you work, the luckier you get. But there was you talk about connections, Troy Warfield, Sydney boy, working for Top Golf Global, based out of London at the time. We had a couple of went to similar schools, similar friends, started talking, and it's like we sort of hit it off straight away. And I think when the PGA trade show in Orlando is like 6 football fields big. It's just it's golf year after golf gear. You get lost. But then to find that familiar voice, you kind of gravitate towards it. But then Ben Sharp, who's the president, him and I get on really well. We sort of we're very honest with each other about where things are going and how it works. But ultimately as well, I'd like to think that they saw that I had the passion for the product. I saw it and I got it and thought this is going to change the world in the world of golf very quickly. So, and then when you're looking at something like a media business that reaches 1.2 to 1.5 million golfers every month, and you've got 2 other businesses off the side, I'd like to think that they absolutely interlink with each other. And there's we've got 5, 6, 7, 10 swing factories around the country. It's going to be pretty easy to market, and little things for us like Golf Digest creating video content. There'd be no better place to do it than the swing factory, and with Top Tracer there.
Yeah, so you're getting that synergies as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So, okay, getting on more about running the business. Yeah, we spoke a lot about people and that aspect. People, autonomy and knowing what they're going to do, etc. But what are some of the, I guess, rituals, habits, behaviours, whatever you like, that you apply to your business, and how important is that advisory and mentor piece? I mean, you mentioned the mentor before, obviously, but talk to me about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got better at turning off in my old age. Lou, my wife, will say that constantly. I'm constantly working. Brad and my team know when I'm up doing stuff, I'll find things, screenshots, send it across to them at all times a day. And I say, it's one of the key things when I say to staff, you're going to get emails from me at weird and wonderful times. I don't expect you to respond to it. I don't really want you to even read it. It's just there at the time I've had a thought, and away we go. Lou, my wife, is a big she gets up early to exercise. She'll be up at 4:30 every morning exercising most mornings, and I kind of stir at that time anyway. And so a lot of the times I literally roll over. I'll generally flip onto the golf news and just see what's going on in the golf world, flip onto a couple of our other sites around the world and just see what the talk is. And then really for me, I have note taking on my phone, constantly think about this. It's like that episode of Seinfeld, you wake up, you write something down. Occasionally I do that, and I'm getting better at turning off my brain, because I think ultimately I was getting to a point where I just wasn't turning off. And at the time I went and saw someone and they said, look, you've got to really try and turn off. And what's really interesting is now, to get to sleep, I've sort of put white noise into my headset, right? And with the ashes on, it's fantastic. So I put the headset on, I'll put it on the SEN or ABC Sport, and I'll be listening to it, and I'll filter in and out of the test match. watch the first session and go to bed. But that, for me, sort of when Lou gets up to exercise, it's kind of the start of my thinking process of my workday. She invariably comes in at around 6, and I've pretty much read every newspaper or read every piece that's out there. I've gone through, probably half a dozen to up to a dozen press releases overnight from all around the world. And then, get up, get the kids, they go to school. They go to school quite early, and I've realised very quickly in my life that I'm very, very efficient. I'm probably twice efficient between, say, 7:30 in the morning through to 12:30, 1 o'clock than I will be for the rest of the day. I just get so much done. And therefore, I've got to try and work out the important parts of my day. So I'm a big list person. I have list after list. I have a diary, writing diary, and every day I've written a list. Those that haven't, I roll over, etc. I'm starting to experiment with a couple of apps, but I just haven't quite found. I still like the process of writing down. And ultimately, then you look at that list and you go, I've got to prioritise that client there. I've got to get out to them today, so let's just feed that up, or this needs responding to, or that. And it's a process thing. And it's probably I was probably a rat bag as a kid. Had 4 sisters, got sent off to boarding school, and probably the great thing about boarding school for me was the routine. I was very sporty, so I'll be training from 6 o'clock in the morning. I had every half hour, I knew where it needed to be, when, where, what, and how. And I remember thinking at the end of school, I'm not going to do this now. I don't have anywhere to be. But ultimately, those habits have come back into my work life, and Lou and I keep a diary together, so I block stuff out. It's like bang. And occasionally, Lou will come home from work, say on a Wednesday afternoon. She'll go, it's 1 o'clock in the Arvo, and I'll go, well, if you're coming home, I'll block in an hour, and we'll go for a walk together. But what I do find out of that is my afternoon will be a lot more efficient for going for that walk, and clearing my head, and just having a chat with Lou and not thinking about it than if I didn't.
We've had again a lot of people talk about self-care, and making sure you're right first, otherwise you won't be as good in the business. So,
and I think that's really important. And I say to my team, like Brad calls me occasionally, I'm going to take the boys down to, he lives near Thornley driving range. Mate, go and do it. School holidays. I'm a big believer, and I personally have got to do better than this in looking at the school holidays, going right. There's times there I've got to take a couple of days off, spend it with the kids, because Addie's 10 now. A couple of years' time, she doesn't really want to hang out with me now, but ultimately it's going to get to that, and suddenly it goes. But I'm big on telling my staff to go and do that. And say, I've got a guy in Melbourne at the moment. He's fantastic. He goes, he almost sheepishly says, I'm just going to go play golf. Mate, go. I can see sometimes I email you at 6:30 in the morning, you email back. Go like that. And I think that 9 to 5 attitude and mentality, we're lucky in that we don't have to be there for clients necessarily. We can work around that a little bit. So if you get the time out to say someone, and letting someone go and play golf for 3 or 4 hours, you'll get that back in spades.
Well, and I think the other aspect there is, are you a results-based business, or are you trying to tick a box that's the way you've always done it? And, like if you can get a job done and achieve it where outcome is, and you're not upsetting anyone, etc., what's the harm? It's actually smarter.
Yeah, I think I read a really good article. I think Microsoft Japan went to a 3-day work week, and the efficiency was still there. And you're like, hang on. But the one line that I remembered reading about that was, if you do a 4-day work week, you cut down your work time by 20%, but you increase your leisure time by 50%. And I'm like, that's the way to look at it. And are we perfect? No. Are we a perfectly smooth running business? No, we're not. But ultimately, if people like working for you and they can see a balance in life, I think that's where the loyalty comes from as well. And my experience is they deliver for you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Good point. So then, what's your biggest lesson? Or we've talked about a few, mistakes on the way, and you said about their learning experience. So what'd you say is one of your biggest ones?
That's a hard one. There's been so many. Like that's. I think we probably the ongoing lesson that I constantly do is, review things once, review things twice, review them 3 times, and I think early on when John passed away, I kind of took a huge amount of burden. Like I wrote this note, just basically what would John do on my post-it note, and just stuck it to my desk. And I've still got it on my wall today. But I wasn't a trust thing. I just had John there the whole time. And so I didn't kind of replace him like I should have in some ways. And it wouldn't necessarily be one person. It would have been other people in the business. If I went back, I would have probably got more counsel from Brad at the time. Rob, my business partner, and I departmentalise a lot in my head. So typical guy, Lou knows when there's something wrong because I'm not talking about, I'm thinking about things, and she's like, and I think necessarily we take that on, and I think 14 years now into the business. John passed away 9 years ago now, I think, and you kind of look at it and you go, I should have taken that burden off me sort of 9 years ago. But there's been countless mistakes, and we'll make mistakes again. I think the best thing that I've learned about this is there are going to be mistakes. You've got to expect mistakes in business, otherwise everyone will be doing it.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely, absolutely.
And that's probably the biggest thing that I've sort of taken on board. The other thing too is it took me a while to trust people. I don't know why. It's just one of those things. And the old adage of, I just took myself a bit quicker. It's amazing how much relief sometimes you feel like when you give something to someone and they give it back to you and you go, I need to do more of this.
Well, it's actually, you got to start with celebrating the little wins, don't you? And then it grows momentum.
Yeah, and I think too, sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees. Like Brad, he was, he's a trained journalist by trade. Very good golfer. Became a golf journalist because he wanted to become a pro golfer, and that was his view. I'll become a golf journalist, and then I'll just play more golf. I probably really should have given him and seen his ability to deal with people and be commercial more so than just pigeonhole him into an edit. He's sort of taken over more of a commercial publisher role in the last 6 to 12 months and just blossomed. And he sends me emails now at different times of the day saying, hey, I'm thinking about we should be doing this or we should be doing that. And that's kind of alleviated a lot of stress. And Rob, my business partner, is just one of these guys that is a creative director. He just gets things done. He's organised to a T. I can just feed stuff to him. And they're probably the biggest things I take out of all.
Yeah, good stuff. So therefore, what's the best advice you've ever received?
There's two bits of advice that I always look back on. Again, John said to me one day, he said, I'll give you a piece of advice. He said, turn up to work 15 minutes to half an hour early before everyone else and stay 15 minutes later. But make those times count. And he said, trust me when I say this, you'll be in the top 2 or 3% in what we do. And back then I thought I knew everything. Now I'm not so sure, kind of scenario. And I went, and I took back, and now I look back on that and go, yeah, that's kind of it. And I think, I can't remember where I heard this is, but I'm a big believer in what we've got as a generation versus, sound old now, but the younger generation behind us is the ability to grind. You get yourself in a situation, it's very easy now to go, look, I'm done. And I read a really good article the other day about social media and influencers, and what they are saying is one of the psyches about, I think it's 27% of people leaving school in America, their number one job they want to get into is become an influencer. And you sit there and you go, you've got people out there that have never spent a day, in a commercial kitchen in their life, but they're a content creator and they're claiming to be chefs or they're recipe creators. And it's very easy to get recipes now and claim them as your own. You've got people out there claiming all this sort of stuff on social media. I'm a health guru, but you're going, well, what have you actually really done? And this article is all about saying what the youngest generation now don't like is feedback. And they don't like getting put in a corner and having to get the way out of a corner. But I love the idea of grinding. And going back to my cricket days, some of the most satisfying days were, a 38 degree day in Sydney, you're out at Penrith, it's the world's flattest deck. They're 1 for 140 at lunch, and you just know it's going to be 4 hours of hell for the rest of the day. But you get through it, and you get to the end of the day, sitting under the shower with a beer in your hand and going, actually, I feel really good now. And I think the ability to grind is something that you can't lose.
Well, and I think it's another thing, and the kids, we taught our kids about this a fair bit, and I'm sure you do the same, but it's not about necessarily just the reward and the destination, but it's about the process. And I guess that's the cricket analogy. Yeah,
and the other thing, Lou, my wife, is very big on, the kids have got to learn how to get bored. And they've got to get bored, and they've got to work out boredom's not a bad thing. Picking up a book and reading, and that gets me out of boredom. And, I'm as bad as anyone picking up my phone. You see your screen time at the end of the week, and you're like, this is just, but that ability later in life, when you're going through a period in your job that you don't like, or you're going through a period in business that I really don't want to be here, and the ability to get yourself from A to B is absolutely critical, because that's what life essentially is at the end of the day, is getting yourself from A to B. And it's not all, it's not all roses.
Right? I agree with that. I agree with that. Mate, we could keep going all day, but I'm going to try and wrap up some of these points. You raised I've taken quite a few notes, some great ones, but I don't say that surprisingly, mate. I didn't expect anything less.
Oh, that's
but,
right.
I think what you said, and for business owners particularly, there's nothing finite. So be looking for that. How do you connect? That next bridge, as you referenced it, and I think with that, your ability to be innovative and adapt. Especially in your game, like we've seen time again, you need to keep doing it. So too many people just get stuck in their ways. I think that was great. People do business with people they like. We've heard that so many times, and I think if you bring that, as you reference, passion into it, you're going to be able to come through in spades as to, not only do you know what you're talking about, but you're passionate about it, and people can, really engage with that, and
Absolutely.
then that leads to that likeness part. One thing that I think was gold has to be a win-win. Too many businesses all about I've got to get the sale. I've got to, it's rather hang on. Is this the right thing? Stuff we're brought up with. Is it a win-win? That's and that's are you playing the short versus the long-term game, I guess.
Correct.
The ability with your people, giving them autonomy. That is a great one. But yet, so many people still micromanage, want to sit over the top. I want you to do this, but do it my way. So. That's gold, but not to be flippant about that. We need some controls and that sort of stuff around it, but that's with that communication expectation. So, very good point. Using tech, you've shown that within that whole different market and the driving range, but using tech in your business, technology is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. You need to be finding ways you can either give more to your client, make the life easier, or create capacity, and efficiency. So that was a really good one. One of the points, and you've done this well, as I said, and that's a learning curve. You're still going, but what we said about the decision maker, who's the real decision maker? For instance, you just said the women in 45 years plus, fastest growing golf market. What are we doing around that? Who's the decision maker? Really important one of businesses to consider. Being agile and then looking for where your synergies are. That was a really good point. But I guess that also comes back to that point about innovation and looking constantly as to where's the opportunity. And then I really like what you said about your own habits. Switching off. I'm not going to let you off and say you're doing it great, but like at least adapting to and we hear that self-care. I've heard it time and time again. And do you actually allocate time for you? Too many people, I look with their diary, they've got things in their diary just for work and meetings, but they don't use time to block out for themselves, etc. So,
Exactly.
Great point. And then, as you said, keeping lists. Whether it be lists, whether it be journals, whether it be reminders, etc., etc. It's actually putting some of this stuff down so that you can get out of your head. You don't miss a beat, and you can still drive the business. So,
yeah. And going back to those lists, I was probably early on in my life. Before you get the groove, sometimes you go, what am I not doing? I'm not going back to my list. And that gives you your structure. It gives you your direction on every given day. Well, that for me, that's a personal thing for me anyway.
No, mate, that's great. I think for anyone, Australian Golf Digest, obviously it's been around for a long time, but get on, check it out. Get along to a driving range, and especially one with the top tracer tech. I take my kids. It's absolute. Well, I don't know how to use it properly. They do, but it's still a lot of fun. And look out for the Swing Factory coming up, mate. I've seen it. I think there's a few people out there that aren't golfers, but there's a lot that are or have golf within them. So the ability for you to be able to take that and make quite a successful business out of it, mate. There's a lesson in that, and appreciate the time on today's discussion.
Anytime, happy to come on.
Thanks for joining.
Cheers, mate. Appreciate it.
Till next time, cheers.